You're listening to We Deepen Media.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Deepen with Christina. I'm your host, Christina Weber, founder and CEO of We Deepen, Feminine Weapon, and also a certified professional coach and intuitive matchmaker. If you haven't lately, go check out WeDeepen.com. See all types of upcoming social and transformational experiences that can help you have a more meaningful, loving relationship. And if you do enjoy this podcast, please do like, subscribe, follow, rate it. It helps more people find it, helps me continue to host it. Give it 5 stars. You know, typically as I start these episodes, I tell you about upcoming experiences that are happening. I'm skipping all that because I'm going to dive right into it. And I'm also diving into this conversation. It's going to be a part 1, part 2 with a New York City astrologist that I've known for about a decade, Rebecca Gordon, and Amanda Young, who is a Tantra teacher and also a teacher of women's archetypes and goddess and embodiment. I have studied with both of you. Amanda, I've taken your program. I look at both these women as being mentors and teachers to me. So I'm super excited to have them on this podcast and to share them with you. Amanda and Rebecca have launched 2 live experiences together. One is Tantra in the Stars. It's for both men and women to come together and get deeper into what draws them to one another. We're going to talk about chemistry today. And their second program is for women. It's Embody Your Inner Goddess. I got to attend that experience over the weekend here in Austin. A group of us women, we went through our charts, our astrological charts, and then we did some embodiment work. I learned a lot about myself through that experience. It's interesting of being in my early 40s and there's still so much to discover. So I'm so grateful. I'm so excited that you two are sharing this coursework and your curriculum with more people here in Austin, also beyond New York City, Los Angeles. I think that you're traveling with this program as well. This episode, we're going to do a part 1 and part 2. So part 1, Rebecca and I are going to dive into astrology, and then part 2, Amanda and I are going to look into goddess and god archetypes and how they affect our connections. You know, their work isn't just in the relational realm. However, that's what I'm interested in, is how we can connect more deeply as human beings and have healthy, loving relationships. So thank you for joining us today. Amanda, I know I'm going to start with Rebecca. What's coming through that you are excited to talk about in part 2 of this podcast?
Well, I'm really excited to talk about mythology and how that is patterned in our bodies, in our physiology, and the energy of how we interplay those mythologies in our relationships. And also, particularly for women, just understanding our role in knowing our own self and knowing that we're plugged in energetically to the Shakti, and how we can guide and lead in our relationships based on that. Like the more deeply that we know ourselves, understanding the relationship between like our own psyche, our bodies, how we can really show up and lead and guide the dynamic in our relationship.
You know, it's interesting. I find that there are many women getting into teaching of embodiment these days. And you are somebody who I've seen and studied with you for now 2 decades. You've been doing this work. What initially drew you to it, and what makes you such an expert in this realm?
You know, it's like I feel like it's the kind of thing that found me. It's like when I started doing this, it wasn't like a thing. Now it's like you can kind of Google embodiment or go on Instagram and find all these women doing it. And when I started, like, I felt like I made up the word embodiment. You know what I mean? Like, I'd never actually heard anyone use that word. And I was on the yogic path, and I kept feeling that my body as a woman wasn't being spoken to in the spiritual practices that I was engaged in. And it was really, I was a nutrition and health coach, and working with women, what I noticed was that even if they had a deep spiritual practice, like a Buddhist practice or a yoga practice, that there was this deep part of themselves underneath that was actually the real malnutrition. It was a malnutrition of the soul. And that malnutrition of the soul was actually connected to their bodies. That it was like when I didn't feel like my sexual anatomy, my breasts, my womb, my pussy, my hips were spoken to in any of the spiritual traditions that I was involved in. And so I really made it my own personal passion and purpose to find that for myself. And so everything that I teach and share is, so much of it was just like really, really self-sourced on my own journey and not in any way derivative. It was like a long path of just coming home to my own body and my own nervous system and finding the connection. It's like I started from a very spiritual pace and then found myself going deeper and deeper into my body and into my sexuality, where at the beginning of the journey, I didn't even know that would be a part of it. So, and it's like I discovered that I was doing Tantra again, like before I knew that that's what it was. It was just all part of my own journey.
Thank you. I can't wait to dive deeper in with you in part 2 of this episode. Now, I know it's interesting because the both of you, I had met separately. And then to hear that you two are now collaborating, there was a joy and excitement because I hope that there becomes more. We're all, individual solo entrepreneurship is happening often. And to hear that you two are collaborating was exciting. How, with Rebecca, and I'm excited to dive into the astrology, but when you hear Amanda share about her work, what was the correlation for you, and why are you two collaborating?
First of all, Christina, thank you so much for having me here too. And I've actually known Amanda since, I want to say 2006. So we go way back, and yes, we both in our 20s started off on a very yogic path in New York City. So I've known her since way back then. And I can say that first of all, when Amanda talks, she just lights me up. I feel like she's a genius. And we've collaborated a bit. And we've also taken each other's classes too over the years. We worked out of the same healing center in New York City since since 2006. So we experienced each other's work, and I think we both admired it over the years. Astrology is something that I will say this. I see it this way. We all come from this one source, one light, and you're born with a birth chart. Your birth chart is your unique refraction of that light. And within that is your codes for living. It is like a map. It maps out parts of your life. You can call it fate, and that's not opposed to free will. Within those maps, we see our codes for love and sex and communication, career, everything relating. Everything's a relationship. When Amanda and I work together, we work specifically in the tantric astrology work, which is based in the love and sex codes, the Mars and Venus, the sun and moon, the polarities within us. And I simply show people their maps that they are kind of given how love and sex and polarities mapped out in each person. And then Amanda gives people the opportunity to really embody those unique codes and feel into them ultimately together, what we're striving to do is to build new neural pathways within us, within ourselves, that are creating a more authentic channel. I think a lot of the problems in the world today are people are kind of living lives that are not themselves. Most people are really frustrated or depressed, and lack of sex drive, a lack of excitement for life, because they're wearing masks. And when we tune in to who we really are and we stop wearing the masks, then it opens up a whole new world. There's a sense of grace and flow and trust and just a turn on with life itself. We work together to really embody those stories, act them out in ways, experience them, so then they become woven into the fabric of our daily lives. They become more natural to us. So I would say that's a bit of how we work together.
Amazing. I was a guest on a podcast yesterday, two guys in Chicago, both 28 years old. Podcast is called Men in the Arena. And both men asked about, it was some question around that they have never been in love. They've loved their family and friends, but when it came into an intimate relationship, that they've never experienced like deep, profound, connected love. And I said, well, have you ever been fully yourself in their presence, like in those relationships? And they both look stumped from like, no, I haven't. And I can see through my own journey, the past decade. I started working in the dating world, like started doing the dating stuff about a decade ago. And I remember, being in those relationships in my early 30s and withholding thoughts and I like ideas and things for fear that they would leave or I would look stupid. And now fast forward, I have this binder that sometimes I carry around of myself that has a different chapter. I'm like, here's my human design. Here's my astrology. Here's, there's my erotic blueprint, my love language. It's all in this, my Bentley chart. It's all in this piece. So here you can now better understand me and my existence. And it's interesting because even, this past Sunday at the Embody Your Inner Goddess workshop, there I was like, I know my sun sign is an Aries. However, I hadn't dove into my Mars and Venus. I was unaware that they were both Aries, and that was significant in how I am doing my relationships. Even moments ago, before we pushed start on this podcast, we talked about, the sun and the moon and how that affects our relational lives. So when somebody has the opportunity, to dive deeper into their astrological charts, I'm curious of, well, first off, like, what do we really pay attention to? What do we really trust in that information from a compatibility standpoint? Like if I have this Time Passages app and you can open my Time Passages app and you'll see it's like charts to compare. And it's literally, I think I have like, 13, 14, 15 men that I'm like, what does it say about us together? But what do I really do with that information that it says we have an overall compatibility of 7 out of 10 or this out of that? What does it really, like, what is astrology really telling us about our relational lives?
Okay, let's break that down. Let's start with the fact that you're born at this unique moment in time. All of the planets are in a very specific arrangement in the sky. And let's look at that kind of like a soundtrack that you're playing out, okay? Let's say you have a lot of planets in Aries or here or there, and it's sort of like, let's just say the Tonga drums, and maybe it sounds like a tribal kind of soundtrack. So that creates a field around you. You can imagine it as sound frequency, and that field also predicates things that you're going to bring into your life and relationships, the kinds of relationships that you will do well with. Now, somebody else enters the world at a different time, right? And their soundtrack, their astrological Venus and Mars and planets create a very different soundtrack, a very different kind of chemistry. Let's say that is sounds like French horns and violins and things like that. So those two people might not mesh. One person, let's say, has a lot of Libra, Virgo, and things like that. And the other, they meet, and I think that relationships are a bit more karmic. And everybody asks me, is this a good match or a bad match? And this app says that or that. I really feel it's much deeper than that. I feel like we need to meet the person that we attract at that time. And I'm in no position to tell you, and I don't think an app should tell you if it is a good match or a bad match, because there are times when we actually need to meet that bad match or that person that triggers us in just the right way so we can relive that thing and we can kind of exorcise the demons or move through it. So relationships are much deeper than I think what apps can tell us what's good or bad. And I think almost we're doing ourselves a little bit of a disservice when we kind of shy away from those harder relationships too, because there's always a meaning in that as well. I find the most karmic, sticky relationships I see, clients come to me, say one person's Venus is on another south node or Mars conjunct the south node. And they keep pulling each other back into these old patterns, which might even feel like past life patterns. But there's a reason those two souls had to meet. Maybe it was challenging and karmic and all of that. There's other symbols that I always see in two charts when, say, it's an affair. And I know that's kind of like an affair, kind of unique chemistry where they meet and it's fireworks and exciting, but it doesn't have the DNA of forever. Sometimes. And that's a unique, there's all sorts of unique patterns of chemistry that create when two people sit next to each other. But chemistry is also the person you're sitting next to on the plane, because you're sending out your vibrational field. And if your Mars is conjunct their Venus, if you're not even saying a word, you might even both feel such a friction an attraction to each other. If your Jupiter is on their Mercury, they might just never stop talking because your planet of expansion is on their planet of communication. So chemistry is always working when we're in a room full of people at a party. The most common form is the sun moon. You mentioned sun moon, and that's actually like one of the Carl Jung did this big study about marriage partners one time, and he found out most marriage partners, the most common symbol was moon conjunct sun or sun opposed moon. And that's very common. But
what does that mean? So if I was to look up compatibility with me, another person, you're saying that my sun is in conjunction with their moon or vice versa?
Yeah, that's actually a beautiful connection, the sun-moon connection. We can talk about that. So if you're sun is like the main character, right? And the moon is the supporting actor. And the sun-moon conjunctions are just lovely because we know the sun and moon like each other. They join every month in the new moon. And let's say you're in Aries, you meet somebody with a moon in Aries. So that would be your sun conjuncting their moon. And that would be you shine the light of Aries, and their moon loves to receive that light of Aries and reflect it back to you. So then you're in this beautiful back and forth dialogue of kind of pinging the Aries energy back and forth, coursing through your relationship. That's like a very natural connection. And my most profound mentors, actually, their moon was directly on my sun. And we met each other in rooms of crowded people and found each other that way. It was never a surprise.
You mentioned before forever energy. And I imagine that, a lot of people we want our forever person. I mean, that's why marriage is a big thing. We want to find the person who make this commitment forever and ever. We're going to be together. You know, maybe it's that you want to create kids or you want to grow old with somebody. How realistic is that when you look at, you've been looking at charts of humans for decades now, how often, and do you even see that within a chart that these two people should be together for forever?
That's a good question. Well, a lot of couples come to me together as a couple, and that's my favorite kind of reading to do, when I get to sit with both people versus one person saying, well, you look at his chart. So the best readings are definitely couple sessions. And the couples come to me for two reasons. One, they're either having challenges in their relationship and they want astrological guidance and to understand each other better, which is a beautiful thing. Or they're about to get married and they're doing it as a sort of ritual and rite of passage to get to know each other. In terms of forever energy, well, the first question I have for couples before they come see me is I ask them to define what is marriage to you, because everyone's definition of marriage is different. And some people are going to say, I want travel, adventure, excitement, and always be learning, always be growing. And that's great if both people in the couple say that. And then the thing I would look for in their synastry, which is compatibility in astrology, is perhaps some interesting Jupiter and Uranus aspects. I would look for very specific things there. But if they simply say, oh, we want to kick back, have a nice home, some kids, make sure they go to a good school, you know, I would look for different kinds of things. Now, Saturn, I'll just say this. Whenever I see Saturn in the mix, Saturn is the planet of stability, essentially forever. It's the planet of we're in it for the long haul. We're kind of glued together, whether we like it or not. Saturn delivers some serious glue. So if my Saturn is on conjunct your Venus, Christina, it might just be that we end up knowing each other for a really long time, maybe forever, whether we like it or not. We could be kind of glued together through certain circumstances in life that just keep drawing us back together. So one of the biggest symbols I see in couples that have made it through many decades is a strong Saturn. And that means your Saturn on their sun, your Saturn on their moon, your Saturn talking to their Venus or Mars, some Saturn in the mix. And if I don't see a Saturn anywhere, and I mean a hard Saturn energy, not like a light Saturn, not like a friendly Saturn, I mean boundary, because Saturn is a boundary line. And without boundaries, it's not really a relationship, or it's not an exclusive relationship. So without Saturn, we're not in a relationship. There's no boundary line. The boundary is like, hey, I really don't want you going out to that party where you're with all those polyamorous people where you might meet somebody else. You know, that's Saturn saying that. But if I didn't say that, then we might not have an exclusive or closed relationship.
Fascinating. And so when you say that, does that mean that if my Saturn was in, say, Aries, your Saturn is in Aries too? Like what?
Saturn changes sign every 2.5 years. And it's just one of the indicators I look for deeper commitment and sort of the feeling of, okay, we're in this together through the thick and thin. We're going to make it through. It's just one of the most healthy indicators for a long-term relationship. And it's usually present there. But, you know, some people come together because they meet at, you know, they might follow the same guru or teacher. And maybe those people have a Neptune connection. And that's more of a spiritual connection that's brought them together. It's always different. Sometimes it's Uranus or Pluto. And they all speak about a different kind of relationship. But I firmly believe we attract what we need. We attract what's in our fate and what's within our soul's makeup. I think we have to know our fate and love our fate and really thaw out to what that is. Personally, I feel you can be the best you can be. We don't want to try to be something that we're totally not. Astrology is all about owning and loving the aspects that are truly you.
So if you were to give like that an example and use you, because I imagine you know your chart and you better than anybody else. Like, how does that, what you're saying, how does that fit into your existence?
Okay, so, well, do I want to talk about my chart on this podcast?
You're welcome to talk about mine.
Okay, let me see. Yeah, I don't know if I want to just like tell everybody all my deepest, darkest secrets here, but
I tell them all my deepest, darkest secrets, so you can just tell them mine.
well, you know what? I mean, it's fine. I think it's fine. I'm just like, maybe I'll just not give them my whole birth chart, but I can definitely talk about placements. Okay. I think it's fine here, right? These are good people listening. Okay. So, all right. So let's tell a story, about the masculine and the feminine within. We all have a little man and a little woman inside us, right? And Carl Jung calls that the anima and the animus. So you can imagine in the right side of you, you can imagine this little man, and the left side, you can imagine this woman, a man, a little woman. These are two archetypes. We all have them. And both live on a very gradient scale. There are 12 different types of versions of the feminine. And there's 12 different types of versions of the masculine that live within us each. And those versions of the masculine and the feminine, come together within us, and they create a pattern for what we're likely to attract in relationships based on where your Mars is and your Venus. Now, if you ask me, my Venus is in the sign of Virgo. So that is the feminine that lives within me. The goddess is operating through the modicum of Virgo. She's expressing herself that way. The masculine within me, he is operating through the sign of Cancer. Okay, so that's my Mars and Venus sign. And together they tell a story about what my ideal relationship would be and the kinds of relationships that I will subconsciously attract, that will come into my life. There's a light and a shadow for each placement too. So, I mean, to be extremely literal here, a story that I always end up in is like my Venus in Virgo loves to work, like sometimes a little too much. Okay. And I've always been that person in the relationship that maybe is a little bit less emotional than my partner. Virgo's earth, and my partner has always been water. Like they might not be a water sign, but they're always like a little more emo than myself. I can say that strongly. And they're always the ones that pull me away from my work, that take me away. You know, they'll kind of like softly touch my neck when I'm like, before I'm ready to finish, and pull me into another room. I won't always get up on by myself, you know, so I tend to attract these very watery, emotional men. Now, when I was younger, that tended to show up in the form of like real wounded puppies. You know, and my Virgo was like, let me help you and serve you and get you back to life. And as the years progressed, you know, after about 20 or more of those, I learned my lessons, and I learned, yes, I do appreciate men who have a strong feminine and who are able to receive and able to access their full range of emotions. Mars in Cancer. That's where my archetype of the masculine lives. And that's how I meet the masculine in the world. That's how I meet a partner in the world. Now, our listeners might be thinking, well, what if I'm gay or bi or straight or anything else? Whatever you align with, the partner's the other. So if I liked women, Mars would still be the other, because I'm attuning to Venus as a woman. So my inner marriage is Virgo and Cancer, which is earth and water. We like to build things together, to create a home. It's actually a little bit domestic there, but I have other kinds of weird and wild parts of my chart too. And that's based in the aspects to them, which is a whole other thing, because Mars is in conversation with other planets and Venus is also in conversation. So it becomes much more nuanced as well.
You were the first one to bring up polyamory in this conversation. And, you know, I have been like, I'm not in a committed relationship at this stage in my life, I look back almost for the past like decade, even more. I mean, my whole, because I've always thought that I would get married and I have children and I would like to do that at some point. So although I've had relationships, you could potentially look back on, these 20 plus years of connecting with humans that I'm polyamorous because maybe I had a relationship here and then I had a relationship here, but I was weaving in and out of them. Is there any thing inside of, in our particular chart that actually references that your makeup is more likely to be polyamorous or your makeup is more likely to be monogamous? Or is it just that we're meeting matches, and when you meet the right match for you, that you'll get pulled into this realm? Because I oftentimes also hear the stories of people who are poly and then became monogamous because they met somebody that they wanted to stand still for a little bit.
Okay, there are definitely certain astrological alignments that show people who like non-heteronormative things, who like non-traditional, who like kink and all of that. Probably the biggest indicator is aspects to the planet Uranus. Uranus is a planet that spins the opposite way of all the other planets. So it likes to do things its own way. It literally spins on its side. And if your Mars, Venus are plugged into Uranian energy, or if anybody's, they're going to have more of an inclination to try new things and simply experiment. So I find that people whose passion planets plug into Uranus are a little more experimental. So whether it's poly or anything else or any kind of S&M, I feel like they're just more willing to try new things. Then we get into the other planets, like each planet. I don't know if you want me to say something about each of them, but like...
I would love that. Yeah, maybe what somebody could, if they're dating somebody or in a relationship with somebody from each planet.
Okay, so we'll talk about the planets and then the signs. Like aspects to Uranus usually do show taking a risk, trying something new, non-traditional, kink. But specifically things like aspects to Pluto have to do more so with power dynamics. Neptune, it's really how you, what you desire in love and sex and what actually makes you feel comfortable. What sort of thing is your entry point? Saturn, if your Mars and Venus are talking to Saturn, there would be rules, a sense of decorum and structure that would make you feel comfortable in sexual or sensual environments. If you have your Mars and Venus talking to Jupiter a lot, it would be the sense of openness, almost free love, or this heart overflowing energy. So your plug-in from Mars and Venus to the moon would be deep emotional connection would need to be there. They all tell a different story, but maybe that's more so for the astro savvy listeners. We could talk about the signs if you maybe.
I realized, you were asking about the planets and I was like, I don't really know how to interpret that. I'm not the astro savvy just yet.
Yeah. Of course. So we can certainly talk about the signs if you want, but I just do want to mention it's so much more than the signs, because the little man and the little woman in you do tell a story based on sign. And what I was just referring to was the aspects they create. So it sounds like you'd like to know a little bit more about, like, if you're dating an Aries, what we need to know about that Aries. Is that correct?
I love that. My Aries is the sun. My sun is Aries.
Okay, so let's talk about Aries. So Aries is a warrior sign, and as a woman, she's a warrior goddess. Now, warriors are so used to being in charge, and they can naturally be in charge in the bed, and they're actually quite good at that. On the other hand, Aries doesn't always want to be in charge, and sometimes they get put in the role of always being the one to lead, always starting things, sometimes being a dom. And I think that Aries can also, sometimes they need to feel like they can just relax and lean back into something strong as well. And Aries often get neglected in that way because they do also need to feel like they are safe and they can lean into somebody too without always being the strong leader of the couple.
I can resonate with that.
Of course, you have your Sun and your Mars and Venus there, don't you? I hope that was okay to say. Okay.
You can, yeah.
Okay. We can just move right on through the zodiac. We'll go into the sign of Taurus. All right. Well, Taurus is ruled by Venus, the senses. Taurus is perhaps one of the most sensual and slow signs, like slow sensuality, really thawing out on each feeling, each touch, enjoying slow kissing, touching, caressing, massage, using scented oils. When you're with a Taurus, their sensuality is their language. So eating a meal with them, slow eating, probably their skin is one of the more sensitized, the lightest touch, and it's really everything to them. The neck specifically is the part of the body that's ruled by Taurus. Maybe we should talk about the parts of the body too, because any touch on their neck or décolleté area, their shoulders, is really what turns them on as well. But they are just like queens and kings of the senses.
So this is man or woman?
Man or woman, yeah. Aries is the head. Touching their head is really great for them. Head massage and all of that. Okay, shall we move to Gemini? All right, Gemini is air sign. So Geminis also, they love versatility, but words are essential. Words are the initial turn on. They need to hear those words in their ear. They can be sweet words, raunchy words, any kind of words, but words are so important, and the use of language. They love intellect. So I think the brain candy ones are their ideal sorts of foreplay with the mind and playing with words and being cheeky with each other. That's certainly the Gemini way. And also Gemini rules the arms and the hands. So any kind of touching with the hands and the arms absolutely turns on our Geminis too. All right. Shall we go on?
Let's go on.
Okay.
I love this. I love, anyone who's listening. I mean, you can take this information and share about yourself and your sign with another human being, or, share this with your friends or those you love.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of good to know, to have in your back pocket when you're with somebody, to know, especially when you're dating a Cancer, because, the old myth is they have their mother on speed dial, right? They do innately have a strong connection to their mother, whether that's good or bad. And that comes with the DNA of being a Cancerian. That said, in a relationship, what they crave most is to feel safe. Safety is so important. So they cannot open up sexually or sensually or in any way unless you really make sure that you've given them a sense of softness and safety there. And so emotional attunement, deep emotional connection, eye gazing, listening to their stories of how they grew up, things they went through, really hearing them through their memoirs, their old journals. They want to really express parts of themselves and feel seen in their emotional landscape. That is so important. And sex is emotional for them. They want emotional connection in all forms of sex and foreplay. Whether man or woman, yeah, I would say, along with both. Okay, we'll move into the sign of Leo, the Leo goddesses and gods here. Okay, they certainly do need to be seen as they're ruled by the sun, center of the solar system. So I love it when Leos really invest in like beautiful lingerie and perform for each other. That's what turns them on. Seeing the other one perform or performing and really creating that sense of a show. There's something almost like voyeuristic or demonstrative about Leo sexuality, to be seen in that way and almost worshipped. I would say worship goes with Leo. I'm just going to say it. They love to be worshipped. Because they're ruled by the sun. I mean, all the planets worship the sun. It's the center of the solar system. So that is a big quality of Leo. And they want to also be generous in a relationship. They would love to take you out to the most beautiful red carpet event and everything like that, to really kind of roll out the carpet in front of you wherever you go to. it's also the sense of the royal treatment. And there's something very romantic. You have warmth. You have an innate warmth as well with Leo.
It could sound kind of kinky, the Leo. Are there any of these signs that are more kinky than others?
Every sign has their own kink, I guess. Like, I guess everybody has a little bit of kink on a gradient scale, if you really want to talk about it. So, I mean, we can say, like the Aries certainly lean more towards dom than sub, things like that. And I would say with a sign like Cancer, there could be an inclination to play around with, things that make them like almost like childish sort of fantasies, dressing up as a younger person or baby, things like that could be more Cancerian, being found by the parents and stuff like that. So sure, every sign has their own. Leo, we're going to give worship to them. And that can go in many directions, I think. And Taurus are just the pure sensualists. All right. So going into the sign of Virgo, I think Virgo is a great follow-up from Leo because Virgos love to worship and Leos like to be worshipped. Okay. So Virgo is also the sign of really the pure maiden in a way, the stories that she needs no one in the myth. It's like she is the Vestal Virgin. She is keeping the hearth fire burning, and she is almost like devoted to, it's not necessarily a partner in the mythology. She's here to keep the fire going, and she needs no one, which is why others find her so attractive too, because she seems to have it all together on her own. And in a way, she is that sort of just out of reach, hard to get kind of archetype. Now, what we're going to see in sexuality and sensuality, it's an extremely feminine archetype here, because it is about serving. It is about keeping the fires burning. And she really enjoys the act of serving and being there for another as well. So we could say perhaps Virgo is on the submissive side. Shall we move on through the zodiac?
Yeah, I can't wait to get to Scorpio.
I mean, it's funny because Scorpios have that rap for being the most sexual, but every sign is sexual in their own unique way, right? I didn't talk about body parts for everything. I mean, Leo's the heart, the warmth, Virgo's the abdomen, the Virgo belly and the kind of like the obliques are very sensitive on a Virgo. Like if you want to turn your Virgo partner on, just really touch the obliques and that really curvy area around the hips. Libras rules the low back. And when we're talking about Libra sensuality, sexuality, everything has to be beautiful and nice. Like the most perfect music, the setting has to be the most perfect lighting and colors. If a Libra is going to feel comfortable, there must be aspects of refinement in their zone if they're going to even feel remotely turned on. They cannot get turned on if they're around people that use brash words and just kind of rough energy. Libra is a sign of arts, beauty, and refinement. Romance, so all of the accoutrements that go with romance, they do like all of the candles and flowers and everything like that you kind of typically imagine with the things that conjure up when you think of romance. That's all Libra. It's like Libra's defined romance for a whole culture. It's like they created Valentine's Day. It's like that kind of energy.
Thank you, Libras.
Yeah, they made romance popular and they did it in a very Libra way, but I think it's sort of like we're all living in a world that's run by Libras when it comes to love. And that's not all of our reality. That's 1/12 of the population. So many of us see love differently. I think that's just an important thing to notice, that those versions of love and romance, those Hallmark versions of flowers, candles, bubble baths, or whatever, chocolates and romance is not everybody's love story. And though it is like with Libra, the attunement to music and sensuality, Libra likes the idea of love more than actually being in love. Like they love to write love poems and see your face when you read it and experience that kind of, writing, sexting to each other, all of those sorts of things, writing letters, but wearing the beautiful lingerie. But maybe they don't love the maybe more unbalanced or messy parts of love and sex that some other signs can enjoy. So that's what I have to say about Libra. But every sign has their role in the zodiac, right? Okay, Scorpio.
Oh, yes. Let's get into Scorpio. I've attracted a lot of Scorpios in my day.
That's really interesting. So you're an Aries. Well, I mean, that's intense because you're fire and they're water. That creates steam. Those must be some highly charged relationships. When your Mars and Venus are in fire and somebody else has theirs in water, that's immediate. That's passion. That's steam energy, Okay, so Scorpio rules the sex organs. So yes, this is certainly a sexual sign. This is about straight up penetration here on one level. There's some signs that are about foreplay, which is Libra. Libra is the sign of foreplay. Scorpio is the sign of sex. Many of us could be happy, in foreplay for years. Some people really need to have sex, right? And I've met many people that say they could live in an ashram and not have sex for years too. So we all channel this energy quite differently. What is Scorpios like? They like intensity, things that are a little taboo and hidden. Don't take them to a picnic on a Sunday with the bright light and the grass, right? It needs to feel a little bit like, okay, it's just you and me in this intimate space that nobody knows about. And there's a secret. It needs to feel exclusive and deep and dark and intimate, challenging a bit. They do like to be pushed to their edges a bit. Also, that's what creates intimacy for them, to kind of go where they haven't gone before together. And then you're bonded in that way. Scorpios love those experiences of those deep, dark rites of passage together, sexually, sensually, intimately. So it's sort of like the realm of Hades. You go into the underworld with them. You take that journey. And then you come up into the sign of Sagittarius, right? Where it's a very different realm. We go from water to fire. Let's stop here. And I want to ask you, how would you, Christina, nutshell your relationship with a Scorpio? I'm just super curious.
Definitely sexually charged. And there is an element of, I'll say Scorpios generally are ones who will show me something I've never seen before. Take me to new places. And, I've been playing in the kink BDSM realm lately. And the first person who took me there was a decade ago, and he was a Scorpio. The relationships have, at that time it was short and quick. This connection that I'm in right now, it has been about 6-7 months. So I wouldn't say it's short and quick, but it's definitely been drawn out over a period of time. And I can see there's an excitement around the challenging aspects of the connection too. Like, it's like not just, it's not, I've never been with a Scorpion. You just jump in with a Scorpion and you're like, everything is just fits right in and la-di-da. And this is so beautiful and easeful and calm and relaxing. There is always a level of intensity within that connection.
Yeah. I mean, you just described the myth of like Persephone being taken into the underworld. Like, your first foray into the BDSM space was with a Scorpio who's like, let me take you to the underworld here. And that's exactly it. They are often those guides that are here to show you. And it's not about showing all your cards. There's so many layers. And then there's layers beneath those layers. And it keeps on going.
And before we jump into Sagittarius, then, question, I oftentimes think that inside of each of us, and you talked a little bit about it with 12 men, 12 women, or 12 different aspects of the man and the woman inside of you, that if there is, is it an illusion that I believe that if I had enough time to stand still with one person, that you could see all humanity inside of each of us?
That's such a beautiful thought. And I'm not surprised that your Venus and Mars are trining Neptune because that is sort of, you took it to that spiritual level, that we are all one, we are all God, we are all goddess, we are all, sure, on some level, we are all extremely connected to everybody and we are everyone. Yes, there's part of us in everything. We're all made up from the billions of pieces of dying nebula out there. But in this incarnation, in these physical carbon bodies, we are playing out these sort of mythologies, these stories, which at times we can transcend, but something always pulls us back to it, and that's fate. There's something bigger because if there wasn't fate, if there wasn't that, we wouldn't be in a human body. If you were connected to everything, and if you were every woman, and if he was every man, and all of that, then we wouldn't be in this incarnate form any longer. You would have transcended this third, fourth, fifth dimension. So for now, in these bodies, we are kind of playing out these archetypes, and it's fun.
It is fun. When I first arrived here to record this conversation with you and Amanda, we went in the story of Persephone. Hopefully, Amanda, you'll share that story when I get into part 2. It's a good story. And at the end of it, I kind of looked at both of you guys a little frustrated, I feel like there's so much chaos in all these stories. Where's just the healthy, loving, easeful, role model relationship? And, I was listening to Richard Rudd on a podcast recently, who's the creator of the Gene Keys. And he talks about how we're each imprinted. There's 6 core wounds, and we're each imprinted within these wounds, or have these wounds that were then wounds that were, through our life journey, are moving to heal them. So how, when you're thinking of the astrological realm, are these wounds that we each have, are they part of this imprint as well in our sun signs? And is this way of connecting with each of these signs a process of healing those wounds?
Yeah. First of all, I love that you mentioned Richard Rudd. I also use the Gene Keys too in my work as well. So yeah, connecting to, for example, if a man is born with a Venus conjunct Chiron, we can say that's a very specific aspect, but that means that there is an aspect of the wounded feminine within him, and that he is innately attracted to women who are going through some sort of painful experience. But there is a part of that wounded feminine that lives within him. So he might be really apt to meet her in the outside world because it will reflect back. But the other aspect of that, the other side of that, is the healer woman or the healing woman. So each archetype has an arc from shadow to light baked into its DNA. So we can say, within your chart, there can be a wound connected to your Mars or a challenge connected to your Venus. It can be with either side, your feminine or masculine. And at different points of your life, you'll play out different parts of the story. Maybe some parts, usually in our 20s, in the early years, we play out the harder, hard knock stories. And then we start to become more aware. All you're doing when you look at a chart is you're turning the lights on in the basement to the weavers of fate. You're basically saying, oh, those are the subconscious forces driving me. Those are my drivers. If I can become more aware of my drivers, maybe I'm not going to end up as a victim of them. It's becoming more aware of your energy and yourself. And so then you're not in a space of completely getting slapped around by your fate all the time. You're working with it and you're activating it consciously within yourself. I don't know if that answered your question, but
It does. And have you seen a chart that you've looked at before and you're like, now that is a rock star, healthy role model relationship? Yes, these two are perfect for each other.
Absolutely. I mean, I've had many relationship couples, but sometimes couples come to me when they're uncoupling too, and they want to uncouple consciously and understand what this relationship was about and honor each other in the end of it too. But I've seen so many couples where I'm like, how on earth did you find each other? I once met somebody on the internet, in the good old Instagram app, and we could both feel the chemistry through the app, and it turns out our charts were so aligned, all of our planets synced up so beautifully. And, we could even feel it through miles and miles away because chemistry works like that. Sometimes something you get a feeling whether you're in the room with them or not. The way the world is now, you don't really have to be in the room with them. You can actually feel whether that chemistry is there if they're writing. I want to say something else though, and I know we have to continue with Sagittarius. Timing is also important. I want to put a pin in that topic because sometimes if it's the wrong time, it's the wrong relationship. If it's the right time, it's the right relationship. In other words, if you're going through a really hard time astrologically, like if you have transits that are like just making your life really hard at the moment. Let's say Pluto's on your moon, Saturn's on your sun, everything's just challenging. You meet a relationship during that time, the relationship will start to hum the same tune as everything else, and it will be challenging. But if you're in a good time astrologically and you meet somebody in that time, that relationship will also then be in those currents of probably an easier, better relationship because that's where you're at. So timing is also so important here. But shall we finish? Because I feel like
let's go into the Sagittarius.
All right, Sagittarius. I know you've been waiting a while. That was a fun digression with you. Okay, so Sagittarius is about big love. They're about adventure, doing new things together. It's sort of this very externalized expression of love. There is a very primal sexuality with Sagittarian. How a sign like Virgo has a sense of decorum or rules or structure and things like that, and courtship involved in Virgo and Libra. Well, Sagittarius is just the opposite of the Virgo Libra space. Here it's just kind of free and wild. And you asked about, is there a sign that tends more towards polyamory? And I say if I had to pick one, it would be Sagittarius. And that's because there's just an adventurous quality to them. They're wild. They want to try new things with you. And sometimes those things can be rather intimate and sometimes not. Sometimes just fun and exploratory to see what happens,
So they don't have to be necessarily sexually polyamory. They could be, but it just is like the exploring of many people and many ideas and having many adventures.
Yeah. And of course they can, I'm not saying all Sagittarians are polyamorous, but you asked me if there was one sign that. Yeah. But of course you can have you can have one partner, and with that partner, you can also be very adventurous in the whole arc of your relationship too, right? So it doesn't have to be many. That said, I do see often people with Venus and Sagittarius love to explore. What would it be like? What would it be like? What would that feel like? What would that be like? It doesn't mean they're acting on, but there's an adventurous spirit in love. Okay. We'll move on to Capricorn. Capricorn is a sign of long-term plans. So I have to say this, it's also a very carnal sign. It's one of the most carnal signs, like very earthy sensuality. They love to know that you have the same long-term vision with them. Like a lot of Capricorns are just simply, into the actual carnal aspects of sex and sensuality, and the other ones need to feel that, okay, we both want this vision together. We both respect each other's profession. We want to have this house together, have this marriage. It's almost like when they feel you're aligned with their goals, they kind of open up a lot more and the true earthy parts of their sexuality come out. But that is more of a goal-driven sign in relationships. And they can also be, I think, highly sensual. They get this reputation for just being workhorses. And they are so much more than that. They're an earth sign. They're one of the earthiest signs. And I think people forget that about Capricorns.
Sounds like a good sign for an Aries.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, they're both very driven. It's a bit of a power couple there. Yeah. All right. Shall we go on to Aquarius?
Let's go on.
Okay. Well, we'll start with the fact that Aquarius loves a strong mental connection. They need to respect you on the mental plane. First of all, to really even open up sensually, sexually. There's also a really, Aquarius is sort of like what I was mentioning before when you have aspects to Uranus, that they do like to try new things. They wonder, what would that be like? There's a bit of experimentation. Maybe a bit more mental and psychological too in that experimentation, but there's absolutely a willingness to try new things and explore a bit, especially if like Mars is connected to Aquarius. That can be Mars or Venus. Yes, that can be more kinky. There could be more experimentation. There must be a meeting of the minds, though. There must be a mental respect with the sign of Aquarius involved. Okay. Last sign. Shall we move to Pisces? It's our final sign of the zodiac.
Let's move to Pisces. Yes.
Okay. So when we go into the sign of Pisces, it's the last sign, and our Pisces, people who are born under Pisces, when you're dating a Pisces, there's this sense of, you mentioned, can't a sign just be everything? Well, Pisces in a way is a conglomeration of many signs. It's sort of the end of the rope, the end of the line, but it is where we move from individuating to the sense of this love that is bigger than I love you, you love me. So when we get into Pisces love, it is almost like I am inside of love. Love is all, love is everything. I am love. So when a Pisces is in love, they're in this bubble of love. And it is a deep sense of compassion, empathy, trust, merging. The idea with Pisces is to actually merge souls together. And their channel of love has much more to do with this kind of watery becoming one and feeling enmeshed deeply with the other. Deep emotional connection that transcends the emotional into the world of the spiritual as well. Pisces has capacity for that kind of love that goes so deep and so vast as well.
It's interesting. I imagine some people listening to that might say, oh, that sounds codependent. How, with us, we all have these different imprints on us, specifically around love and connections and relationships. How do we not project onto other signs? I imagine that's happening a lot of like, this is healthy. That's not healthy. Like if, a Pisces merging into one could sound to another sign like, oh, you don't want to do that. Make sure that you miss each other and separate at the same time.
Right. There's so much judgment in the world. And I feel like astrology is a study of compassion. Ultimately, when you know somebody is that sign or that kind of chart, you allow them to fully be that in all their glory. People see astrology in all sorts of ways, but I see it as a study of compassion, a study of allowing. And you don't want to place judgments on them. Well, that person with that whole orchestra of a chart, well, let's say that sounds like the xylophone and all of these things. They will never be that person that is representative of the tribal drums. They shouldn't be. We're all here to be exactly who we are. That's the beauty of it. And if you don't match with somebody in chemistry, then people get so offended about that. But I also, well, that's, the patterns didn't resonate. It's so much bigger than us. The problem is when our minds get too involved and we really want something to work, but that's the mind. If we allow chemistry to really do its thing and to listen to it, I do think we need to move kind of slowly sometimes. And we're in this world, this whole swipe dating culture and everything. it's kind of like next, are they meeting all these requirements next? And I just feel like that's such a debasement for chemistry and what it's really about. Like if we just slow down a bit, we could really feel if there's chemistry or not and how we're expressing it, and let our chart, energetic bodies, let our fields interact. Because a lot of times a relationship needs to be something else, and we're doing it such a disservice if we're trying to kind of fit it into the square hole. If we want, okay, I want this person to be a husband and that, but maybe they have a very different role to serve in your life, and you will never know unless you take off the role that you want them to be and listen for the chemistry to speak. You might need to be business partners with them. They might be a lifelong friend. They might be a mentor. We don't know. So it's really best to kind of, I think, have a bit of humility with all this and give more space for our fields to interact. That's what you do, right?
That's what I do. Yeah. I like to say of giving space for the relationship to be what it can be. And at the same time, I have a longing. I recently did an iboga for the first time. It was like Aya first night, iboga second night, and then the iboga ceremony was like 36 hours, and then Aya again. There's a podcast episode on this that's called Ayahuasca Iboga. And what was really like I was feeling in that ceremony was like this like tension to solve this area of my life. Just find the guy, label it him, like that's you. Let's just hold hands and run into the abyss, have the family and do all the things and check it off the list. Just solve it. So I do. And I think there's a universal feeling of that. You know, a lot of us just want to have it figured out. And, you know, obviously, yes, life is a journey into love, and it's about the adventure and the company along the way as we're, you know, phasing up and up and up. The question, though, that I was going to ask, and then I know you have a thought too, is you mentioned timing as a really important piece to be able to live out, I guess, this karmic play based upon your imprinted blueprint. What are some other things that potentially may block somebody's faithful path from living out the right relationships for them at the right time?
I mean, trauma, right? And I mean, okay, if I can just mention, you mentioned what your experience was in that ibogaine ceremony. Now, let's also look at your chart, right? You have Venus and Mars and the Sun all in Aries, which is a quick sign, very much going towards a goal fast. Yesterday, now, why isn't it happening? And there's something of that. We all have our lessons encoded into our charts too. So it's very interesting that that's what came up for you. And it's almost like you were questioning those parts of yourself that wanted those, you know, the Aries parts of yourself that just want to have it all done right now and yesterday, and I'll figure it out. Let's just go there.
Yeah, because there's a little shame for like almost like, calm down, Christina, just relax. You know, it's fine. In due time, everything will, you know, will happen as it's supposed to.
Well, that's a perfect example of like, we meet the shadows of all of our planets and signs as we live, and in ceremonies especially, right? They like to show up and it's like, oh yeah, that's me. That's this thing I always do. And it's good to see what's living in the basement and those parts of us that can get in the way when we're not looking. We can see also the parts of you that are your strength as well. Like we can see you are a Venus in Aries. You are a warrior goddess, and you are fierce. You are strong. You advocate for other women. You advocate for other people. And see, these are all parts of the goddess within you, the Venus and Aries goddess. And sometimes any of our planets can swing so far in one direction. And we have to kind of check in with them. All of us have this. Any of our planets can go into a shadow form and become too heavy-handed about whatever we're doing. And that's why it's great to have relationships that give you perspective, or friends or community, people around us that say, hey, wait a minute. It seems like you're doing this or that or whatever. But is there anything that can block us? Well, I think we block ourselves a lot of the time. We get into patterns that are uniquely our patterns. Like, we all have our things that we do. We all block ourselves. It's just good to know them. And they're all in our charts. I have them for sure. Each one of us does. And so being aware of that is everything. Oh, I'm doing that thing again. We can put a label on it and notice it, and then also learn what it's like to cross the bridge and be on the other side of that story. So what happens is, though, timing, yes, timing is everything. And a lot of times clients ask me just about that. When is the best time? And I've told clients, hey, you might want to take a year off. Sometimes they don't want to hear that in terms of love. It's just, sometimes it's just challenging for a period of time. And then everything opens up, and those are years, I would say, when not much is going on for love. Focus on career, or do something else. Other things are looking good. People often like to focus on the harder areas of their chart, like whatever is challenging. People love to drill into that. But there's usually Jupiter or some really positive things going on in a different area. I would say one thing is, for sure, trauma can be something, our personal stories, our personal chart, and then timing. Most of the time, though, we meet just the karma we need in our life to learn the lessons we're here to learn with our Mars and Venus and Sun and Moon too.
What's the best question you've ever been asked on a podcast?
I love your questions, Christina. I think yours are the best. And I love talking about all of the sides of love, sensuality, and sexuality through astrology. I'm having so much fun here.
But seriously, I'm wondering, what is the best question that could, maybe this is my Aries self is coming in, to make sure that, I have this time with you, that I'm able to share Rebecca Gordon on this podcast, and want to make sure that listeners get the most out of it. Is there anything that you find is most helpful for people to hear when they're contemplating their astrological being?
Well, astrology is a language of energy, and it should not be something that stresses you out. I feel like a lot of people these days are like, oh no, Mercury is retrograde, or this is happening, or that's happening. And I see people getting so stressed out about these things. And I look at astrology a bit differently. I feel like the culture has a bit of a cortisol stress level relationship with astrology. And I see it as a study of compassion and a study of how we can be better in relationships, learn about ourselves. Also, we all came here for a unique purpose. Astrology is about uncovering who we are and actually accepting it and not having a problem with all those parts of us, allowing it, making those parts conscious. It's such a beautiful thing. And I grew up in a household where we would talk about astrology just like the weather. There's a moon in Leo today, it's sunny, and things like that. I've grown up with it my whole life. So it was never off to the side or in a corner. It was always part of the fabric of everyday living. And that's kind of how I live with it in a more natural way. And when I teach, I've been teaching for about 20 years. I run an astrology school. I teach it through parts of nature and ecosystems too. I have a beginner's class coming up in October. And also the goal in learning astrology, people come into astrology like, okay, I'm just going to learn how to read charts. And once you start, learning how to read a chart, you start learning about all these parts of yourself and all these layers. And then you end up on a lifelong journey that never ends. And I'm still on it. There's nobody that ever finishes. I mean, I'm still discovering layers and layers of myself through the chart because there's just so much out there in the sky. And we're never, ever going to learn about it all. It's the beauty of it, is the vastness within each of us. There's such immense vastness and beauty. I love people. I love humanity. I love discovering another person and their stars, their star language.
So you have a course coming up in October. You said that's for beginners. It sounds as though, you're learning to read a chart, and that so many people have gone and they've gotten their yoga teacher certification, but they never become a yoga teacher. And the information that is gathered, like in this podcast, as you were sharing, there's some of the pieces that are a bit over my head. I'm like, all right, I need to sit here. Should I pull my chart out to make sure that what Rebecca's saying makes sense? And am I relating all this? And so in that October course, it's for beginners. Is it for somebody who, it's not just for somebody who wants to be do astrology as their career?
Well, we get all kinds of people, actually. I mean, from all over the world. There's so many students who come in who are saying, I want to be an astrologer. And many people come in with the intention to learn more about themselves, because, I mean, that's a great intention to have. And also people who come in to do it as a hobbyist. But I will say this, from day one, it's a 12-week course, and I run it all through the year. And I have a certification version too. I will say this though. People come in almost not believing that in 12 weeks that they're going to be able to read charts. I think there's a little sliver of disbelief because they're like, how can I look at this thing with all these lines and numbers? I feel like I am a teacher. I feel like I love teaching astrology more than anything else. And something magical happens in every class. Like, even if, let's say in the beginning, 20% of the class is not at the level of everyone else, just by way of being in relationships and constellation groups with the rest of the people, everybody in the class levels up. And I really love to promote each person's unique voice as an astrologer, because that's your lens of the world. Allow the planets and stars to speak through you. What does that sound like? It's not going to be me. So we also cultivate that. And yes, people do learn how to read charts beautifully in a 12-week course. I mean, I have a whole year-round curriculum of art of the reading classes after that, and astrology of love and relationships, astrology for entrepreneurship, and many other things in our curriculum. But this is probably like my main flagship course that I love teaching every year. And yeah, it starts in early October, but it will also be available after that. There's live sessions with me. There's constellation groups. It's a lot of fun. I feel like your listeners would probably also be interested in our Astrology of Love and Relationships class too, though.
We'll definitely share in the notes and at the end of this podcast, or the description at the end of this podcast, of where people can find the course. This podcast does follow my entrepreneur journey, as I have a goal of shining light on conscious community or conscious connection. Essentially all of the modalities and teachers and experiences that can help people have healthy, loving, epic relationships. And I'm curious about, from a business standpoint, astrology as a business. How have you seen of starting, your career in astrology? And you said 2006, maybe it was even before. How have you seen, and granted, we have the internet that came about, but that the business of astrology has become a market that is noticeable. The uptake inside of the market. Like, is there more opportunity for more astrologists or more people to become astrologists, for more astrology courses? Like, are more people seeking out this information than before?
Yes, it's been growing exponentially. And every year we graduate so many astrologers that create their own websites, their Instagrams, and also create courses. And I always say there's enough room for everybody. The world needs more astrologers. I want you to open up next to me. And that's why I teach astrology for entrepreneurs too. But like I have a Leo rising, and I feel like that's my teacher's that's my way of teaching is I give and give so much. People are always like, wow, that is so much more than we ever wanted. But I want to make sure everybody's set up for success in the world of building a business, because I didn't think about how to be an entrepreneur when I thought about being an astrologer. Because back in 2006 and 2004 to 2006, when I was building my business, I didn't think of, okay, I need to learn how to build a business. I thought I'm going to start doing readings, and I love doing readings. And I just can't help but share this with everybody. And over the years, especially with the advent of Instagram, astrology became so popular. And, fast forward about up to like 5 years ago, we have like billions of dollars and like venture capital money being injected into astrology now. So it's like this huge industry that it became. And back in 2004, when I started going to conferences and things, I was the only young astrologer there. I think I was like 24 years old. And literally everybody at that conference was probably over 55. And I was 24. They were kind of like, what are you doing here? Who are you? Why are you so young? And so my first mission as an astrologer was to rebrand astrology and make it accessible to younger people like myself, because it kind of pained me that I was the only young person there. And I could see why too, because there was no real initiative for the batons to be passed on. It's almost like I had a feeling that there was gatekeepers, or that it just wasn't being passed on as it could have been. So my first mission was to democratize astrology and open up a school where anybody could join. And that was in New York City. And I did that in 2005. I got back from that conference. The first thing I wanted to do was create a school, my own school. I was very ambitious. I didn't know everything, but I knew some things. And I thought I'll just teach what I know and go from there. So I've been teaching, since 2005 and running classes. I mean, back in 2005, Alex Gray from Cosm Art Gallery in Chelsea at that time asked me to give a talk at the gallery one night about astrology. I'll never forget that night. It was a solar eclipse in my third house. I gave a talk, and suddenly people were calling me an astrologer after that. And they were all trying to book readings after this gallery opening, this event. Very soon after, within months, I was able to quit my day job. I was working in the art world at that time. And I had met Susan Miller concurrently, at a conference, at that main conference. And she was like, what are you doing? You're an astrologer. We had this whole exchange. And she also kind of helped push me off the cliff to really trust the path of astrology. I mean, I feel like I've had many great mentors over the years too. I feel extremely lucky. She's one of the people whose moon is directly on my sun, actually, Susan Miller. So coming into astrology now is like 50 times more easy and lucrative than it was 20 years ago when I started. When I started, we were not, it wasn't about building a business or making money. It was about we were just doing what we love and doing readings. So there was no Instagram. I don't want to sound like a grandma here, but back before Instagram, it really was a different landscape. And, I was doing readings in person all throughout the week out of a holistic healing center. And I loved it. I mean, I did that for years. And then when Zoom happened in 2012, I jumped on to Zoom. I was one of the only astrologers using Zoom in 2012. Everyone was using WebEx, and we started making classes online. And so we've been growing the online school pretty much since 2012. But I guess when the pandemic happened, so many people who had been studying astrology began to start full time because they also lost their jobs. And I realized we were just getting really flooded with so many astrologers. And I thought, well, this is also great. This is great because it's letting younger people know that this is possible. This is a career path to take, and it's viable, where it wasn't really a path. Like, I had to pave my own way, trailblaze through the jungle at 24. There was no real roadmaps. I did have a few great mentors, but there was actually no peers. And so that's why I created the community in New York back then and online, really to make it accessible. Anyway, I'll stop now. I don't want to do the whole grandma chat.
Well, it's so fascinating. Last question before we wrap, and obviously we can see how I have a hard time with keeping this podcast within just 1 hour. What do you believe is like the future for astrology? How will astrology be accessed as we continue to evolve and progress? Like, will there be astrology hotels and big conferences and retreats, and are corporations accepting this where the HR department ask you your astrological signs?
Yeah, you're actually right on it. I mean, I've been creating team building events for companies for the last 7 years. Like in June, I did a team building event with Google, NBC, Letterpress, Etsy. I mean, just like recently, I've done so many team building events in the last 6 months. So that's something I also focus on, is bringing it to corporations, large teams, small teams. It's a tool for people to get to know their strengths and their areas of growth, to get to know each other better, to play and work better together. It's beautiful in that way. So it works very well in the corporate setting. That's something I've been focusing on most recently, and it's been a lot of fun. I've also collaborated with brands to create products using astrology too. I mean, I do see it continuing along this path of getting more and more integrated into the fabric of everyday life. I just made a scarf, an astrology scarf with your birth chart on it, with the shoe designer Christian Louboutin, the shoes with the red at the bottom. And we created this stunning scarf with their team in Paris based on your birth chart. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they are just phenomenal. It was just such a gift to work with that Parisian team. Like, it was real Taurus energy. We spent so long contemplating which style of the stroke on the planet Venus to use, and all of these wonderful details that we could just really thaw out on and create this beautiful item. So, I mean, sure, I've been working with fashion brands. I've been hosting corporate events, all sorts of things. Definitely, I was in the conference circuit for a while, and obviously that took a break with the pandemic. But I lead retreats, and I think my students are doing these too. My students have created such amazing brands into themselves, like creating perfumes based on people's charts. I've seen students do so many wonderful things that are not just necessarily, sitting at a kitchen table reading charts all day. So I think there's many ways to do astrology in the world. And some people are like born astrological researchers, where others are great at doing consultant work. Others are teachers. And that is also based in your chart, like what your greatest skills are. So I always encourage people to lean into their charts for strategies, of how best astrology will speak through you uniquely. There's definitely enough room for you all. If you all want to study astrology, the world needs more astrologers. Yes.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm so excited for you to continue, and for We Deepen to be able to share the Tantra and the stars and embody your inner goddess. Before we close up, is anything else that you'd like to share or wrap with?
Christina, it's been such an honor and so much fun to chat with you here. I just want to honor you and our friendship over the years. Spending time chatting about this means the world. Thank you for everything you do and fostering intimacy and relationships. The world needs this right now. Thank you.
Based on my chart, am I doing the right job?
You are a leader. You are a pioneer. we talked about that in the workshop, that beautiful Venus and Aries pioneer woman. You are doing the work of your stars. Absolutely. Live your stars. Trust the path. Thank you so much, Christina. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Your wisdom is so fascinating, and it's been such a blessing to turn to you for the past decade that we've known each other, and seeing you just shine and share more of your work with more and more people. And now to be here from New York City and to Austin, Texas together in this collaboration. Thank you all for listening to another episode of Deepen with Christina. Again, if you do enjoy this podcast, please do like, subscribe, rate it, give it 5 stars. It helps more people find it, helps me continue to host it. In the description of this podcast, I will share links to find Rebecca and her work. And I'm going to be back with part 2. This episode is going to release on Sunday evening. You'll get part 2 on Wednesday with Amanda Young. So stay tuned for that. Okay, bye for now.